Why is it so important for empathic people to seek approval from themselves first rather than try to seek approval from other people? Hi, my name is Leah Chantel. Welcome back to my channel. And today I'm going to talk about why it's so critical that we approve of ourselves and make decisions from that place rather than making them from the place of pleasing other people. And I had made this mistake before I was more intuitively enlightened in my life. I was definitely seeking approval because I was raised basically to go to school and follow the professors, get an A, do really well in your job, have security, and to always abandon myself for that authority figure rather than to believe in myself and to trust my own authority and my own ability to make decisions. And I'll start first by distinguishing the human heart from the true heart, because I think this is something that really messes us up in terms of advice, and it ties in quite nicely to seeking approval, and you'll see why in a minute. So have you ever heard the conflicting advice, follow your heart versus don't follow your heart? Like the Bible says, don't follow your heart, it'll lead you into sin. And yet I believe following your heart is actually essential for discovering your own wisdom. But why does it say the opposite in the Bible? And I found the answer when I was learning more about Taoism and Confucianism. It's because there is such thing as more than one version of the human heart. And our human heart is actually quite greedy. And that greed is not necessarily greed in the sense of, oh, I have to do anything to get rich. Although there are some people like that out there, and it's a form of greed. Although I find it's a pretty rare form of greed. Like there are a few people like that out there, but they're typically not intuitives. We're going to get into the more common forms of human greed in a minute. But first of all, I want to distinguish this human heart from the true heart. So our true heart, that's our true inner wisdom. And so that we can follow. That is where we want to seek approval from ourselves. And that's where you're going to take responsibility for your own life, and you're never going to steer yourself wrong. Of course, that doesn't mean we bypass all of our difficult moments in our life, but when a difficult moment shows up, we're going to handle it the right way, resourcefully, because we're going to be responsible adults, and we're going to make sure that we don't make the same mistake again, rather than repeating mistakes over and over, because we've put our approval in somebody else's hands who we then later blame. So when we put our sense of approval into somebody else's hands and we let them control our lives, what ends up happening is things can go wrong, and then we never take responsibility for it. There's always somebody else to blame. We blame our teachers, we blame our parents, or we blame the government. And we've all been there. We've all been mad about something like inflation or housing prices going up. And how dare they? But truthfully, everything in your life is in your control. You can find ways to make more money. You can find ways to adjust to the situation if you really want to. And it's a matter of you being responsible and having the agency to do so. But if you're always in that place of blaming someone else and you never take it a step further to take responsibility for your own life, you'll never find the right solution. And so let's start with an example of an earlier time in my life when maybe I wasn't so resourceful, I didn't know about intuition, and I made a decision based on somebody else's approval. So this happened shortly after I finished graduate school. I was constantly working contract jobs, and they were kind of okay, but I could never really get a permanent job or benefits at the time. And so I saw a job opportunity out west, and I decided to go for it, and I got the job. But at the time I was very conflicted. I didn't know if it was the right thing for me to move to Western Canada or not. But the interesting thing was the outside approval in my own life at that time. My parents, my former bosses, my friends, they were all pushing me to go move west because they said, you hadn't gotten any better jobs here. You need to improve your life. This is your big chance to get a permanent job in your field and to make sure that all that work you put into your graduate degree didn't go to waste. So I had a lot of pressure to move, and I ended up moving and taking that job. However, if I could do it all over again, I don't know that I'd make that decision. And the reason why was because it was so driven by other people's approval rather than coming from my own self-approval. And I didn't know what intuition was at that time. It's so funny, I actually did see a book on intuition in the library once when I was a librarian, and I kind of pulled it out looked at it, flipped through it, but I was so in my head at the time, working so hard to get my graduate degree. I looked at it and thought, energy, intuition, what's this? I didn't really understand it, and I put it back on the shelf and then went back to living my life for other people's approval and working hard and being very intellectual. And that time when I made that decision to move out west, it was based on intellectual approval, it was based on logic, and what ended up happening was I had a very challenging boss that time. Now, that's not to say I've had good bosses. I've had a lot of amazing bosses and amazing jobs, but this particular job was not an easy job for me. And I think the reason why was because I started off, even on the wrong foot from the very beginning, of following other people's approval rather than seeking my own approval at the time when I was going for the job. But having said that, I don't regret it because that ended up being a valuable life experience. And during that time when I was in that difficult job, that's when I actually did discover intuition and I figured out how to use it properly. You know, just from looking at a book, it wasn't really enough for me to connect to my authentic self. I had to really learn how to feel that from inside, and that took studying with a couple of different teachers in order to find my true authentic self by doing some of the exercises they told me to do through journaling, through breathing, through meditation. I'd done meditation before, but the concept of the meditation I was going for at the time, which is pure enlightenment, which is good. There's nothing wrong with enlightenment, but the thing was I didn't really know about approval or being a victim or what it meant to follow your own intuition at that time. And because I didn't know that, I was still trapped in that paradigm. I needed a good teacher to kind of guide me along to learn how I could be responsible for my own life. And I eventually got that at that time. But it took a while, and it took a lot of suffering and feeling that life wasn't fair and that I was stuck and that I was really, really desperate to get out of that situation before the right solutions came about for me in my life. And I started making more empowered decisions. Now, after I started learning about my intuition, the jobs that I took after that first job in Alberta ended up being really empowering choices. I even started my own business early on when I was living in Alberta because I would see one of my bosses in my former jobs running a business, and I could see a lot of mistakes that he was making, and I thought that I could do better. Now, of course, I made a lot of mistakes too, starting businesses very early on. Like, for example, I didn't go on social media for a long time. I did a lot of things through word of mouth and basically direct mail pieces or posters and things like that. And obviously, that can only take you so far. I'm not saying that those things never work, but they're not nearly as effective as going online and doing things digitally. But I was a bit nervous about being famous at the time and what consequences there would be if I put myself out there online. And that's a whole nother story that I could tell you about maybe in a course or another video. But anyway, the important thing about this lesson is that I started making decisions from my own approval rather than from others' approval, and that's when opportunities really started to take off for me. That's when I started traveling to other countries or moving to places that I thought would be too expensive for me to afford and finding ways to live and enjoy the places that I lived in, like New Zealand, like Toronto, like London. And that really turned my life around. And basically, it came all from making decisions from my own approval rather than from my intellect or the approval of someone else. You can't go seeking approval in your personal relationships either. So if you're trying to do things to please a partner, and a lot of women are really guilty of this, they try to do things to please men, and the men might enjoy it for a little while. But the interesting about men is they actually enjoy challenges and they actually enjoy achieving things. So if you chase too hard after their approval, they actually don't appreciate it and they'll start taking you for granted, which is the interesting thing about relationships. It's actually better to be your own person and to go after your own dreams and goals in life. And the right man is going to be attracted to you because of your authentic self. I mean, it's possible if you're in a period of very accelerated growth and you change a lot as a person, sometimes your partner doesn't come with you. That can happen. But the good news is when you become your authentic self, the right partner should show up in your life to match where you're at after you become more authentic. And you can't chase after approval from not only your partner, but also your parents. So we've talked a little bit about bosses, jobs, partners, and now I'm going to take it to parents. So our parents basically want us to be the best that we can be, usually. unless they really don't care, which is really sad. Sometimes they don't. But in my case, my parents really wanted me to become successful, but on their terms in a very traditional way. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think they did the best that they could in terms of what they knew. But I learned a different way in terms of getting approval from myself and starting my own projects with my own initiative, rather than waiting for bosses or for job opportunities to come up and use my gifts, skills, and talents. And that has allowed me to develop a business and develop a career that I really love. And that's what I highly recommend to a lot of intuitives. Rather than waiting around for the right job opportunity to show up, just start working on your own business today. Although I'm not saying you can't take a job opportunity when a good one comes up, but you should really develop your skills on your own through your own initiative and through your own business. And when you work on your true authentic skills from your own place of self-approval and you develop them through a business, basically you become in charge of your own life. It might take a while in order for the business to take off and for everything to be finished and for you to learn everything you need to learn. But even if your business takes off, it's still a process of evolution and growth that you need to maintain and look after if you want to continue being successful in the future. So these are all my tips and tricks on how to seek your own approval and the ways that it looks like in your own life. And as an extra tip, I haven't had children, but it's a good thing to mention that you don't want to go seeking approval from your children either, because you're the adult who's supposed to guide them through the world. And if you don't guide them, and you try to be their friend instead, they actually may get very lost in the world. And so sometimes you can't be their friend when you're guiding them. It's a very tricky position to be in, and it comes from a place of unconditional love. But I mean, that's why people decide to become parents, right? And so I hope you enjoyed this video with all of these examples I've given about why it's so important to follow your own approval rather than the approval of someone else. And when you follow the approval of someone else, that's when you start turning into a victim. You start blaming other people for your problems. And that's why it's so critical to take responsibility for yourself and for your own life in order to have the best life you can possibly have. If you have any comments about ways that you empower yourself and take control of your life and seek your own approval rather than the approval of someone else, definitely leave them in the comments below. I'd be really interested to hear about that. And if you have any questions about how to take control of a situation in your life where you are feeling pressure and you are feeling internal confusion about whether or not you should go with somebody else's approval, whether it's safe to go with your own approval instead, I'd definitely be willing to answer those questions as well in the comments and help you out. It takes a lot of commitment and persistence, and not everybody has that. But having said that, I hope you can develop it. If you found this channel, I think there's a good chance that you're on the same wavelength as me. So I hope you're all having an amazing week, and take care.